Hello everyone. Today I'd like to make a quick point about the difference between existence and being, philosophically. And to first explain this difference, I need to first define what I mean by world, by the world philosophically. I'm not referring here to planet Earth when I say this word, but rather I'm referring to the philosophical concept of, say, the container of all life action, of all, so it's sort of like the playing field, or the action field, where all action within the universe occurs. Now, of course, this is separate to the universe itself, which is just the estimation of everything which exists. But within existence itself, there is a being. But this is different to existence alone. So first, I must say that Schopenhauer created this idea that the world itself has being, or rather the world itself has will, and that in order for us to live according to this sort of great purpose that the world is driving towards, we must our will must be like that of the world. We must have the will of the world within us. And Schopenhauer came from a time where most philosophers themselves weren't Christians as such, but they were all within this sort of frame of thinking, this sort of Christianized frame of thinking, that there must be an ultimate end to everything, in order for there to be a purpose, that the world must be driving towards some sort of goal, some sort of end, some infinity. And Schopenhauer was just trying to reconcile that sort of precept with his notion of the will. So this is one of the main ways in which Nietzsche disagrees with him, because Nietzsche explained that there is no affinity to anything really, but rather there is a recurrence. And even if a lot of people, there are sort of two parties when it comes to this Nietzsche's idea of the recurrence. I certainly find myself within those who believe scientifically the recurrence exists, but there are those who deny it. And they often use quantum mechanics to try and disprove the idea of recurrence. But I'll possibly make another video on that. I've already made a video on the recurrence, but I'll make another one just to go into more detail on it. What Nietzsche was really saying, which everyone would agree on, or at least agree that Nietzsche was saying this, is that it's very damaging to believe in this sort of that the world itself has this certain purpose, that everything's sort of flowing towards an ultimate end goal that's already predestined. And therefore, there's a simple code that we can live by in order to live superiorly. Because this is the same sort of Christian thinking, or Christianized thinking, which leads to morality and the exaltation of virtue as a concept of something which makes us like superhuman, which is just silly. If the Superman or some superhuman did exist, he would not be virtuous. So to define being, you first have to understand this recurrence. Now I've made a previous video about I've made two previous videos about this recurrence and about fate and the will. So there are microcosmic sort of strands of eternity connecting that which exists to this eternity directly, perpetuating this recurrence. And so those beings which have these beings are the ones which have will. Without will, there is no being. But the world itself does not have a will. Rather, there is fatefulness and fatedness. The world itself is fated, but those which have fatefulness, those which share the essence of fate, and are sort of like strands of eternity, able to connect the different microcosmic changes, and at the same time withstand that sort of eternal destruction and creation which would lead us to the impression that there is going to be affinity and end to everything. To define being, there's really just three different groups of beings, right? And let's say these are the gods, as I would call them. Nietzsche would never use that term, but I would call them the gods. Then I would say human beings, and then I would say other life forms. That these are the three groups which have will, and therefore they are the groups which are in a state of becoming, rather than altering. The world, being fated, is constantly altering. However, to become, to propel yourself through one strand of existence to another, to connect the microcosmic forces to the macrocosmic, you must have being, and therefore you must have will. Now, one might say when they think of this, as they often say when they hear of Nietzsche's concepts, is that it's somehow defeatist or nihilistic, which is a gross misunderstanding. Because I do believe that meaning of life is not dependent on some sort of end goal, some sort of purpose, some sort of finite purpose rather. But I do believe meaning in life can actually be found through being itself. So if you consider how necessary it is to construct your own fate, to actualize your destiny through your own will, and that rather than being completely fated like a rock, the fact that we, through the conceptually the gods, what I would call them, the fact that we have been gifted with this willpower, this allows us to sort of hammer our fate into eternity, to form an image of ourselves and then make the world conform to it. And this ability to have to connect and to construct and then connect that which you construct to the eternity is itself gives us all the meaning we need, because what you do will be done again and again and again for all eternity. And therefore, to be and to become, it's you cannot through being sort of falter and wither. Through being itself, through act of will and through strength of will, you can become, and to become is always to advance spiritually. To exist within an eternal state of becoming would be to exist in the way of the Superman. At least that's how I believe it. In terms of other points which I was planning on making, they've left my mind at the moment, but perhaps I'll come back to them. Yes, one more point I was going to make was the mythological aspect of this. Now this sort of diverts away from the points of reference Nietzsche was actually using, because Nietzsche was not one of these who analysed mythology. He was actually quite against the sort of esoteric way of interpreting philosophical truth and whatnot. And there are many others who are in this sort of party, because in Germany at that time there was sort of a rift between those who were the esoterics, often studying archaeology and fields like that, and building this myth, which at the time hadn't been properly constructed yet, behind the German people. And then there was Nietzsche, who was more of a pragmatist. But I do believe there was also a mythological element to this too, which can explain it. For example, in Voluspa, the Norse creation myth, it talks about how the gods, after they have killed this figure known as the Gold Drought, and they've burned her alive 3 times, she is often depicted as one of either one of the giantesses, one of the 3 giantesses who were mentioned in just a couple of lines before that, or else perhaps she is another godlike figure, perhaps a Volva or one of the Vanir. But anyway, this the gods coming into contact with this an antagonizing figure, or this antecedent figure, this one who following after them perhaps, well, I interpret as one of the giantest, one of the representations of that which is fated, of the natural destructive forces in existence. After they destroy her, they have to gather in the world, in this action field, in order to decide the fate of those Aesir who did it. And then again, this is just representative of being in the world, and of the difference between of faithfulness and fatedness. And you'll find more mythological elements to what I'm saying too, of how if you're not living actively, you're withering and faltering, and to have will and to somehow strive against fate is the best way to actualize your fate, and to again compound that within the eternity. Again, this is more sort of a topic for another video, because it goes into the esoteric, and for that I think it's more sort of tangential, but it's something else which should be looked at, because it is one of Nietzsche's most potent theories.